The idea of Charcha was born in 2020 when we were all in the middle of the lockdown with the first wave. We started getting calls from various nonprofits feeling equally helpless as we were on how do we come together and do something that is impactful on the ground, as migrants were figuring out ways to get back, people didn't have food, and nobody knew what to do. I think it was a 3 weeks notice in which we said that, okay, if we don't know what to do and others are asking the same question, can we just get together? And this idea of coming together is what sort of gave birth to a convening platform called the Nudge Forum now. In a 3-week window, we actually started talking to people, got 13 co-hosts of the first Charcha in 2020. We had 573 speakers in 3 weeks and a global audience of 10,000 people who consumed Charcha 2020. That gave us a lot of confidence. In 2021, we said we should continue to bring people together. Charcha 2021 was again a success, but all online. Over the course of the last 2 years, we've also done smaller convenings like Agri Charcha with the government and other smaller convenings with the various partners. This is the first time we are doing an in-person convening Charcha 2022. Super delighted to actually be here. We have a very, very exciting lineup. But this year, Charcha is also slightly different and unique. Nudge also in the last couple of years went through a very, very big change. We started as a poverty alleviation organization. And over the last couple of years, as we were reflecting on the last 7 years of the Nudge journey, we evolved ourselves from the Nudge Foundation to what we now call the Nudge Institute. It's an action institute, and the idea is to work very closely with governments, markets, and civil society to focus on only one vertical within the broader ecosystem of the work that people do to address poverty, which is livelihoods. We want everyone in the country to have dignified, sustainable, and resilient livelihoods. And that's the narrow focus of the Nudge from here on. I say narrow, but livelihood is a very, very broad ecosystem, from skill development, financial inclusion, mass entrepreneurship, rural livelihoods, agri, dairy, services, MSMEs, financing. There is so much in livelihoods also. So today, in this Charcha, we have tried to work within the livelihoods play. So Charcha 2022 is a livelihoods-focused summit, and our hope is that that will allow the conversations to be deeper, collaborations to be tighter, and hopefully some nice work out of this will come out that will actually make meaningful difference on the ground. So with that, I won't hold you from the real content that we have for the day, but a very, very warm welcome on behalf of the entire Nudge team to this event. And also on behalf of all the co-hosts, thank you so much for taking the time and coming here. I will request all the co-hosts of the Nudge, the fact that it's a platform that we run together with so many other partners, I will request all the co-hosts of the Charcha 2022 to say a couple of words on what is their aspiration for the day and beyond from this day. May I start with Madan, co-founder of GAME.
Good morning, everybody, and delighted to be here. Thanks to the Nudge guys for getting us together. And I think I love the concept of getting multiple organizations to co-host certain tracks, and we are very delighted to partner and bring the whole conversation alive on this concept of mass entrepreneurship. Somebody said it beautifully that entrepreneurship is all about serendipity and conversations. I think that's the day I'm looking to, this day is all about that, I presume, that we will meet people in person, which we haven't for the last couple of years, have conversations, and hopefully next year when we meet again, we can say, hey, this is what transpired in the conversations that we had into action. So looking forward to a day filled with conversations of action. Thank you.
Thanks, Madan. Vikrant, the founder of Vedis Foundation, one of the co-hosts for the day.
Hi. Delighted to be at the first offline edition of Charcha. And judging by the number of emails and calendar invitations over the last few days, I think the team deserves a big applause just for putting this together. I'm delighted we are hosting the governance and state capacity track today, which has been very, very passionate, which is something which over the last 10 years I've developed a passion for. Um, it's one of those things which we often tend to overlook, but I'll just explain why the passion, and a few people have asked me about Veris Foundation, so I'll very quickly give a quick background. So the foundation's been around for the last 10 years, but many of you will know our first consumer-facing solution, Let's Change, which now is Give India's online fundraising platform. With an investment of, I would say, around 15 crores, but many years. And the leverage came principally from the time that was spent. I was surprised and very pleased to hear that last year the platform raised 1,250 crores. And on an ongoing basis, it will continue to raise 500 crores a year or more, growing on a sustainable basis. So the leverage that 15 crore investment and some time over a few years ago has done is phenomenal for the various NGOs who now benefit from the platform. As a tech entrepreneur and a marketer, using technology to maximize the leverage, maximize the impact with our sort of grant making came obvious. But having gone through supporting a number of organizations, we realized we could have similar impact with our grants if we could leverage public spending. And therefore, as an organization, now the focus is all on maximizing the impact of policy. So if we can help improve policy formulation or improve policy implementation, that's fantastic. So we now work with a number of rural livelihood missions. That's one vertical that we focus on. We work with organizations like JPAL and ID Insight that work with policymakers. And we also support a number of other organizations. I'm looking forward to the day, to the discussions during the course of the day, because I do hope, organizations working together, and hopefully we'll have a lot of interesting meetings, we'll be able to figure out how to make a sustainable quantum increase in livelihood, especially the ultra poor that you focus on, the nudge is focusing on, so that the ultra poor get to middle class within a generation. And over the next 75 years, as we look ahead, India gets to a first world country. Jai.
I'll request Hari from the Gates Foundation to share his aspirations.
Thanks a lot, Atul. And congratulations to the Nudge team for pulling this together. It's great to meet people in person. There are several folks I'm seeing actually after 2-3 years. So in terms of our aspiration, I'd say, we are privileged to be partners with the NRLM in their grand vision for, the 25 million livelihoods by 25, and then I think doubling it by 2030. And my general approach is, everyone says, right, never waste a crisis. And what did the last 2 years teach us? I think it brought philanthropy together to start working collaboratively with much greater purpose than I've ever witnessed. So I'm looking for collaborations to emerge from today. And the second is, I think just looking at livelihoods as a central issue. I think, the migration and the mass migrant challenge that we witnessed, particularly in the first half of 2020, showed us just how fragile livelihoods are for a vast majority of our population. And I think, the government has done a great job by now making livelihoods front and center of development policy. And I think for us as the Gates Foundation, there's also the added element of women's economic empowerment and how, creating opportunities for women can actually lift all boats in terms of all household level outcomes and indicators like almost nothing else. So that's the primary lens for us heading into Charcha 22 and of course looking to the next 3 years and the next 10 years. Both the potential for us to create a basket of opportunities that can benefit the poor both in rural and urban areas, and the enabling role that technology can play. Technology not as an arrowhead or as a silver bullet, but the role that technology can play as a connector and equalizer. And I think, India, to my mind, has a huge role to play in creating innovations that will probably drive sustainable development across the global south in the next 25 years. And I think partnerships in that direction as well. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Hari. I request Geeta from the Dell Foundation, Michael and Susan Dell Foundation.
Thanks, Atul. And again, a very, very big congratulations to the Charcha team. I think you've done a great job. Charcha, Nudge, whatever, the extended family. I would just say that, yes, I mean, of course, livelihoods is a key focus for us at the foundation. We see this as a forward integration of our work in education, as a backward integration of our work in financial inclusion. But the core of the problem, we are also trying to address is how do we create more employable people in India? And by employment, I'm not saying formal employment, it is entrepreneurial. So I think we have 650 million people below the age of 25. And if we can, just help them be more productive, entrepreneurial, conscious, with agency, I would say, and then the industry will do its own job of, creating more employment opportunities, and these people will have the, I guess, the drive to generate more economic outputs. So I would say we typically have looked at livelihoods from the supply side, and that will continue to be the focus. At Charcha, just given the scale of the problem, I don't think any of us as individual institutions or individuals will solve the problem for India. I do think we need to break the silos. And several of the ecosystem efforts are generated out of conversations like Charcha. So I think we should have a lot of debate on ideas, brainstorm a lot. And I was telling Atul that if we have a team which is following up on some of these, definitely before the next Charcha, we would have some actions that have been seeded. And this morning I was discussing with Sharad that many of these efforts takes years to bring fruit. I think we were talking about the account aggregator platform. So yes, it may take 3, 4, 5 years, but as long as there is a collaborative, well thought through effort, which is solving the problem, I do think what it will unlock is much more than what individual organizations can do. So looking forward to lots of interesting ideas coming out. Thank you.
Awesome. We move to Dipali from the Rockefeller Foundation.
Thanks, Atul, and congratulations to Charcha. I mean, I did join the previous 2 Charcha events by Zoom, and it's great to be here in person. I also want to congratulate the Nudge team, the Nudge Institute, and we feel so privileged at the Rockefeller Foundation to be having partners like yourself. I think the theme that you have for Charcha this time around, resilient livelihoods for all, is very, very important. I think we tend to forget that, you can't have a one-size-fits-all. And especially, at the Rockefeller Foundation, we are very concerned around how do we work with the marginalized, disadvantaged communities and really make sure that they also have the benefits, the equal opportunities for them. How do we really look at issues of equity, inclusion, and the work that we are seeding with you, Atul, through the Nudge Institute, the Ultra Poor program. I think the discussions from today are really going to be helpful to see not only what we can learn from countries like Bangladesh, where the graduation model has worked, but evolve our own model and take it to the next level. I think I want to highlight, 4 things that I'm really excited about to learn from all of you today. Is the first thing that I mentioned around how do we really ensure gender equity and equality is at the heart of everything that we're talking about today. How are we really ensuring when we're looking at livelihoods, we are kind of really getting to listen to the voices of the poorest communities and really keeping them at the center of all our conversations rather than trying to figure out what we think they should be doing. So I think that for me and really understanding, and each one of you in this room has had such phenomenal experiences, and how can we really catalyze all that so that we can really bring this to scale and bring this alive, I think is something that I'm really looking forward to. The second important piece is the intersectionality. I think, Atul, what you mentioned, that you're looking at livelihoods, it's a narrow focus. I think it's such a broad focus because whether you're looking at health, we've seen during COVID crisis, the health safety nets weren't there, and what happened to livelihoods, We know that if energy poverty, we're not going to address energy poverty, people in the rural areas or even in the urban areas don't have access to reliable energy, livelihoods are not going to thrive. So it's very important to be looking at reliable sources of energy, renewable energy. We need to be looking at food systems. We need to look at the health architecture. So how do we look at the intersectionality of all these different pieces of work that need to be done so that you can really build up resilient livelihoods? I think that is very important. We've all seen the climate crisis, which is, we're in the red code zone right now. The IPCC report has told us where we are. And if you look at the recent heat wave, who got affected the most? You know, I had the benefit of speaking to salt pan workers, women workers with Seva that were, you know, they were used to be working, they were used to kind of living in climates 42, 45 degrees, but 52 degrees centigrade. And, you know, it was difficult, very, very difficult. So how are you really going to be ensuring that for women who are salt pan workers, you know, with the climate crisis, the kind of livelihoods that are going to really be one where there's dignity, the other where they're really going to be able to make not just two ends meet, but then they can really live with dignity is going to be really important for us. The next piece is, of course, Hari, what you mentioned, technology and the role of technology. How can we really get the best in class and make sure that we provide that to not just, you know, people who have access, but those that don't have access. So I think that still remains a major challenge. Finally, I'll bring in the piece. You know, I've also been joining some of the conversations that started to happen in India around G20. I think we have a phenomenal opportunity where we have Indonesia, India, and Brazil that are going to be hosting G20. You know, whatever emerges from here, how do we really make sure that the leaders of the G20 are going to be really walking the talk in terms of really transforming lives of people in their individual countries, but we've also seen through COVID, through the climate crisis, the interconnectedness. So, you know, even if India gets it right on the climate issues or we get it right on COVID, that's not going to help us or insulate us from, you know, what's happening around the world. So I'm hoping that, you know, when we're talking about resilient livelihoods, whatever we are learning, how can we share that within Asia, which is really our decade for action? How can we take the best practices? How can we learn from others? Because that's really going to be important. How do we collaborate, not just at an India level, but at an Asia level and more globally? Because the world is just so interconnected. And, you know, when it comes to livelihoods, we've seen with the Ukraine crisis right now, you know, everybody is getting affected. You know, the indiscriminate sanctions that are out there is affecting even a poor farmer in Bihar one way or the other. So how are we kind of keeping this macro context in mind as we are really trying to move forward and really making sure that we put all our energies behind to really bring about the transformational change that we all believe in. So thank you.
Thanks, Dipali. Sharad, co-founder of iSpirit. Quick 2 minutes, Sharad.
Yeah. So first of all, you know, I'm a fan of what Atul, Sudha, Arun, and 300 other people I think that you are doing. It's very inspiring, and you know, and so you know, to be part of this is a privilege, and you know, because you learn so much and connections get made. So I'm very happy to be here. The new perspective that iSpirit brings to the table is to say that can public technology be the lever of change, and that's an experiment that is going on. We don't know what the long-term impact of this would be. And some of that you'll hear today, you know, with respect to lending and health and some other areas. So that's really an experiment that is on and could be used, public tech, to draw in the policymakers, to draw in the market players and get to a new steady state, you know, from the one that we have today, which would actually be solving the hard problems that many of the fellow panelists here mentioned a little while back. So it's interesting times, as you said, you know, lots of change in the next 10 years, and let's see where we end up after that.
Awesome. I think it's an absolute honor and privilege to be co-hosting Charcha with such a amazing lineup of institutions, organizations that have enabled so much of the work that civil society does in the country. I'll now like to request Shri N N Sinha ji, Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development, to come and share his inaugural speech, keynote speech for this.
Good morning to Atul, co-host today on the dais, eminent people, and eminent people within the house. I think it's a great day today, and the kind of conversations that we will be having would have large-scale implications on the partnerships that are being forged on several of these dimensions going forward. So, many of the panelists and co-hosts today on the dais are partnering with the government and the public sector across the center and the states, and it kind of allows us to delve into ideas and the areas where much greater partnership can bring improved results and better results. So, starting giving the keynote address probably allows you to delve little deep into the factors that are impacting livelihood. So let me take this opportunity to address some of those issues. So I first of all, I take this issue of what do we mean by resilient or sustainable livelihoods. So I take a definition which has been given by two people, Chambers and Conway. They mention that a livelihood opportunity comprises of capabilities, assets, which includes stores, resources, claims, and access, and activities required for a means of living. A livelihood is sustainable, which can cope with and recover from stresses and shocks, maintain or enhance capabilities and assets, and provide sustainable livelihood opportunities for the next generation, and which contributes net benefits to other livelihoods at the local and global levels and in the short and long term. So this is the definition, and I think it allows us to focus our efforts on these dimensions of resilience of the livelihoods. So let me now take some deep dive into what the rural livelihood profile consists of, and this is not current status, but of about 10 years ago, which was derived out of the Indian Human Development Survey done in 2011-12, but kind of gives you a lot of idea as to what kind of livelihoods these consist of. So from that survey, agriculture, 30% of people were engaged in agriculture, about 16% derived their incomes from agricultural labor, casual labor about 20%, salary about 11%, business about 8%, remittances about 7.7%, and other incomes consisted of about 7.2%. Household which earned income from different sources, and I now come to agriculture about 73.6%, agricultural labor about 35%, casual labor about 46%, and this, mind you, this was a rise of about 18% from the 2004-05 census of ISDS survey. Salary about 19%, business about 15%, remittance about 17.7%, and other income about 46.9%. So I mean, and all of them together add up more than 100%, because a person can have livelihoods from incomes from many areas. Now, if I come to the issue of which are the main sources of income, so agriculture, labor, casual labor, salary, as well as the agricultures, they were actually the main income sources. The casual labor and remittances are inequality decreasing. So that also gives you an idea in a country where the inequality is so large. What are the pathways through which inequalities can be decreased, and how could the livelihoods be fashioned around them? I now come to the asset base of the rural household. So if you see the households which own land up to about 0.01 hectare, that is about 2.6%. From 0.01 to about 0.4 hectare, that is about an acre, 32%. 0.41 to about 1 hectare, that is about 35%. 1.01 to 2 hectares, that is about 17.1%, and taken together, all these consist about 86.5%. So 86.5% of the Indian households are small or marginal farmers or agriculture laborers. If I take you to the issue of indebtedness, and that all of these data come from some verified sources, I'm not cooking them up. This comes from the situational assessment survey of agriculture households by the NSSO in the 70th round. Of course, it's about 12-13 data, but this is the latest one. And surprising thing is that in the agriculture, the indebtedness increases as you move up the higher agriculture holding classes. So if you take up the land holding class up to about 0.01 hectares, it's about 42% people are, households are in debt. If you take 0.01 to about 0.4 hectares, about 47%. 0.41 to about 1 hectare, it's about 48%, and 1.01 to about 2 hectares, it's about 55.7%. So as you move up the land holding class, your indebtedness increase, and that probably tells us a lot about the need to provide easy sources of credit, need to diversify livelihoods, so that people, in order to continue with their current occupations, do not get further and further indebted. These numbers are corroborated by the socioeconomic and caste census, which indicated about that 30% of the households were dependent on manual labor as the main source of livelihood. And the states with a high proportion of such households included Bihar, where 47% of the household drew their livelihood from manual labor, West Bengal about 44%, and other states where such high numbers were seen were Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and Tripura, where each one had more than 30% households deriving their livelihood from the manual labor. Now I come to the issue of resilience from the vantage point of the climate dependence. The issue of the fact of most of our agriculture being dependent on monsoons is well known to everyone. More than 2/3 of the rural population is directly or indirectly dependent on climate sensitive sectors, which agriculture and allied activities like livestock rearing, fisheries and forestry for the livelihood and forest security. So one piece of data that gives you some idea as to how this is coming from the climate change is going to impact them in a huge manner comes from the cropping intensity. And cropping intensity is the number of crops that you are able to take out of a particular piece of land. So this varies on an all India basis. It comes at about 150%, 152.2% to be precise. And it ranges from Odisha having 113%, Chhattisgarh having 120%, and goes on to 192% in West Bengal. So ranges between 113 to 192. I mean, if all the lands were put to 3 crops, I'm not saying it's a sustainable thing, then the incomes could theoretically rise twice up to what they are at the current level. So there is a great piece of action lying in improving the agricultural productivity of the lands, and that could come from going over to the natural farming, so that the land have more carbon content, they are able to absorb more of moisture, retain moisture using IoT. I was told by FPO in Pune that when they started using IoT-based devices, they could take 3 crops instead of 2 crops from the same pond that they were drawing their water from. So there are multiple ways in which we could address this issue of climate dependence and taking more out of the existing piece of land. Another piece of information on the climate dependence lies from the work done by some people on the food security vulnerability due to the climate change events. And they found, based on again the ISD data, that about 31.5% of the households were food insecure, and about 68% of households in Chhattisgarh were food insecure. And obviously, it ranges from 0% in Goa to 68% maximum in Chhattisgarh. And the climate events that impacted their food security was drought, mean temperature, as was mentioned by one of the co-hosts, household size, dependency ratios, etc. So the climate is another big elephant within the room that we need to address too. Now I come to the issue of gender as a major issue. Limited access and opportunities to sustainable livelihoods for most marginalized. For example, rural women may be hired as agricultural labor, but they are commonly paid only up to half to 2/3 of the wage received by men performing the same amount of work. Whenever the households allocate work, most of the agriculture work gets done by women. So if you see 3/4 of the agriculture work or the livestock related work get done by women, but in terms of their income, their share of assets, etc., do not exceed 25%. So there the issues need to be addressed, and I'm fortunate to head that piece of work in the rural areas from the NRLM, where we are addressing this issue for about 84 million women under the fold of the National Rural Livelihood Mission. One more piece of information in this regard is also of the issue of the labor force participation. Labor force participation by women continues to be quite poor. At this moment, if you see the latest piece of data, it's just about 25%. And if you see comparative numbers for other countries, even in Asia, it goes up to as high as 60%. So in order to improve our income, we need to bring more and more women into our labor force, and that's a piece of work that needs to be done by country as a whole, partners as a whole, working with the public sector together. Now let me take this issue of the another important piece relating to the poorer social communities. And if you see, let's take them from the vantage point of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Arvind Panagadia and Vishal More did an estimation of the poverty based on the Tendulkar line, poverty line, and they found that if all of India could, about 22% of the households were below poverty line, it was 31.5% for the SC communities and about 45% for the ST communities. And most of these areas are in the central Indian belts where there are a large number of forests, and you will also find that the LWE activities are more in those areas. So a lot of ideas for us to do work in this regard. And this is not only the result from the estimation by Arvind Panagaria. We also did some amount of analysis And we found that from the socioeconomic caste census, if we took up the non-excluded households, so we found that if all classes consisted of about 61% below the not excluded households, the numbers rose up to 72.5% among the SCs and 78.5% among the STs. So STs happen to be the worst economic class, and we need to make efforts. Niti Aayog recently published multi-dimensional poverty index, and there also, if for all India, if the people below poverty line based on the NFHS 4 results were 28%, but for the SCs, the number was approximately 65 million of the 125 million households. And for the STs, about 94 million of the 283 million households. So these are the pieces of the livelihood puzzle that we need to handle. So it should focus on the households where the intersectionalities of social classes, income classes, landholding classes, all of these converge, and how do we focus our livelihood efforts in a manner in which the vulnerabilities of these households are addressed and everyone of them is enabled to earn a decent income which lifts them above the poverty, which allows them to live with a life of dignity. Our minister, Mr. Giriraj Singh, has defined this task for us in very simple terms. He says that we should aspire for our women in annual income of about 1 lakh or so. And if we are able to do that, then probably with other resources available to the households from public supports and services, allow people to have the livelihoods which will provide them with a life of dignity. Another area which I need to also address, we are also seeing from the Consumer Pyramid Health Survey that there is a movement to agriculture. And that comes from the PLFS periodic labor participation survey. So it was about 42.5% in 18-19, and 19-20 number went up to about 45%. So there is a shift taking place to agriculture, and therefore we need the two lessons out of that. One, we need to increase the productivity of agriculture so people are able to draw more income out of agriculture. And secondly, we need to diversify, create more non-farm incomes and employments so that they are able to derive a larger proportion of their income out of those non-farm sources. Now I come to the public sector efforts in this regard. And the most crucial piece of work that we are doing is the work that is being spearheaded by a program called Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, National Rural Livelihood Mission. And the main task that it attempts is to establish effective and efficient institutional platforms of the rural poor that enables them to increase households' income through livelihood enhancement and improve access to the financial and public services. Of course, the lens of the social inclusion is always there. We also intersect their efforts with improved representation in the groups themselves, also their participation and engagement with the public space of Gram Panchayat, etc. Recently, our ministry and Panchayati Raj ministry did an advisory to the state governments where we requested state governments to offer the special invitee status to the leadership of the village organizations and the cluster level federations, to the gram panchayats and the panchayat samitis, the intermediate tier. So we think that having engagement with the public sector institutions or community institutions already participating and available will increase their stake and allow them more leverage to influence the allocation of resources to them and probably make a more efficient outcome of the existing set of resources, and also allow them to mobilize more resources. Typically, how does that happen? We have a mechanism called Gram Panchayat Development Planning. Within that, there is also an instrument called Village Poverty Reduction Planning, and Village Poverty Reduction Planning is a framework which collects the livelihood aspirations of the individual households, particularly the poor households, and then tries to match them up with the resources in the area of credit, the skilling, the public support services, to match their aspiration and to build their livelihoods and enterprises in this regard. These get integrated with the Gram Panchayat Development Plan, and each one of the departments is supposed to draw a list of these activities that they need to support the women entrepreneurs or women households or the households in this regard. One simple example, for example, if people want to take up poultry activities, then the poultry shed may come from Mahatma Gandhi Narega if the households are prioritized out of that, and it would get included in the shelf of activities of Mahatma Gandhi Narega for that Gram Panchayat. These livelihood are also needed for younger workers, where the labor force participation for the youth is about 38%, and if you take up the subgroup of about 15 to 29, the labor force participation rate is still lower. So we need to do a lot of work in this regard to increasing the labor force participation through multifarious efforts at skilling, efforts at entrepreneurship, and I'm very happy to hear that many of the partners would work in this regard and increase the employability, increase the participation in these areas. We need to work in the area of agro-processing, micro-enterprises in crafts and manufacturing, housing and small infrastructure construction, and services of all kinds, from trade, transport to health, education and business services. There are a lot of opportunities available in the post-harvest. There is a lot of wastage and there is a lot of income that can come out of the post-harvest opportunities, and a lot of work needs to be done. And most of these would come from skilling, from investment in resources, and from aggregation, which many of the partners and the NRLM program is taking up on a very large scale through its stress on formation of community aggregates like village organization, the cluster level federation, the producer groups, the producer enterprises, farmer producer organizations. One of the pieces that Hari spoke about, and this happens to be the crucial lever and crucial linchpin, we should say, around which our work is revolving. That is of creating 25 million livelihoods in 3 years for the poor households. And we are staking all our efforts in this regard, and we invite as much partnership as possible. And I hope today's conversation in this charcha would allow many of these partnerships to come together. Skilling and entrepreneurship development, as I mentioned, are important levers, and the issues that we are currently addressing is how do we ensure that programs like RCT program, which have provided entrepreneurship training to about 41 lakh people and have settled about 29 lakh people, continue to remain relevant. The people are able to pick up skills in order to upscale and intensify their enterprises. They get the necessary support to continue to remain relevant and get more and more employment to more and more people from rural areas, and thereby enable the shift from farm to non-farm. As I mentioned earlier, this is an extremely large piece of work and would require the effort of public sector and private sector and the NGOs and the CSOs to work together in order to make this happen. I thank Atul and his team for giving me this opportunity of addressing this issue in the manner that I did just. Thank you very much.